Morning, folks. Good to see you all. So, uh, I've been reflecting uh, on the difficult and uh, unparalleled times we're living through, and and there's so much not knowing of what's to come, and there's so much, I think, shock at the disruption to the social order, and and I got to thinking, what does this remind me of? And it reminded me of, obviously it's a different situation, but it's got certain things in common with 9/11. This kind of unprecedented moment in the life that we took to be fairly stable as Americans and in this country. And I remembered that right after 9/11, at the time I was training with Daido Loori at Zen Mountain Monastery, not always at Zen Mountain Monastery, I was coming and going. I happened to be there the month after 9/11 in October. I was co-leading a writing workshop. So I experienced a lot of the direct rawness and shock of what people were experiencing. Zen Mountain is, I don't know, less than a couple of hours from New York City. And whenever I would visit, I would fly into New York City. A lot of their students came from New York City, and they had a New York City center as well, kind of a satellite center in New York. So they were right in the thick of all this when it happened. And I remembered that Daido Loori and Tetsudo Sensei, his first Dharma successor, really stepped in immediately in a big way right after it happened. And for a while, they had daily conversations with the Sangha, question and answer and discussion, and including some things online and just various ways of connecting with the Sangha in an ongoing manner. And I've been wanting to go back and look at some of that material because, well, there's certain similarities in, for one thing, I don't know how to respond to this moment in our history, and yet I'm not sure any of us do, and it seems to me that one of those pivotal points that it's going to have repercussions to play out for a very long time that we're going to end up dealing with. So I went into my garage, and there is, there's great value in disorganization, clutter sometimes, because I dug through all the certain boxes of old materials and stuff, and lo and behold, I found the mountain record from fall. This is the publication of Zen Mountain Monastery. I found the mountain record of for fall 2001, where they were just dealing with this, and started looking at what had just happened and started looking at it, and it is striking that, as I thought, that there are many parallels. There are many parallels in the way that they helped to guide the Sangha and things that came up for the Sangha. Obviously, there's big differences as well, but I wanted to share with you some of the issues that were raised, and of course, what we're always most interested in is how does this relate to our practice, and what do we do in and with our practice in a way that responds to these kinds of moments, which are challenging just beyond our own individual lives. And I'm sure, well, there's a lot of not knowing in people's questions, answers, and including the teachers. And I feel a lot of us are in that place now. The ground seems to be shifting socially, politically, in terms of our culture, and it's not very clear yet how things are going to play out and how we need to act. I don't know about you all, but that question of which kinds of actions to take, or are there any actions we can take at this point, it's definitely been up for me, and I bet it's up for a lot of you as well. So I just want to read some passages from this whole series of exchanges that went on daily for quite some time. And, you know, just being in the role of a teacher, I slightly quake in my sandals to think of Daido Roshi having to deal with basically his first public remarks were at noon on the day 9/11 that happened. How do you come up with something to say, you know? And also they had a large extended sangha, hundreds of people. So, but now there's a daunting thing for anybody who claims to be any kind of a spiritual leader to have to stand up to. Anyway, I want to share some of this. These are Daido Roshi's remarks beginning at noon on September 11th. I'm just going to take some excerpts. He begins by saying September 11th was a day that shook us awake, fiercely reminding us of a few stark truths. Obviously, we're not pinned down to that date, but I've been fiercely reminded of a few stark truths lately, and perhaps we all have. And here's some of the truths that he names. There is no resting ground, sorry. Although he always used to say that a famous statement of Daido's, which is why I spoke it that way, is don't make a nest. In other words, don't hide out. But in this case, that's not what he said. He said there's no resting ground. There is nothing to rely on. Not knowing is, after all, most real. We feel anew the urgency of our practice of responding to the world with wisdom and compassion, and yet this time is rife with confusion. How do we take this up? How do we respond? Kind of familiar thoughts, to me at least. We offer ourselves our raw humanity as practitioners, letting our vows to awaken turn our despair into spiritual fire. That one really struck me. We take these vows to help other sentient beings, to help other beings, to serve. And it's easy to just take them as kind of a routine thing. We recite the 4 vows all the time, the Bodhisattva vows. But I was really struck by, can we let our vows to awaken turn our despair into spiritual fire? Wow. Somehow practicing together makes it possible to open to what feels impenetrable, to love and live in the face of what we cannot bear, to respond to what seems beyond our capacity. As the immediacy of the events fade, let us keep returning to the vital lessons of this time. If we don't transform the world, who will? And I'm just going to read some other ongoing excerpts from these conversations. The fallout from these events is going to reverberate around the world for a long time. For most of us, this is something that's beyond anything we've ever experienced before. As spiritual practitioners, this is what we train for. This is what our practice is about. Certain of these statements, like, for most of us, this is something that's beyond anything we've experienced before. I think that's a fair statement of this moment in our history as well. And the mention of confusion, how much confusion is going on, is also very resonant to me. So what can we do? We need to do what we always do: create a sanctuary of peace, nourishment, and calm. Remember your zazen. Remember the still point in your heart. Do what you need to do when you're asked to do it in a way that's peaceful and centered. I think this is a big deal. I've seen really ever since the election of 2016, I've found myself in various positions of giving talks to very, very disturbed groups of practitioners. There's been a lot of, maybe even more in 2016. I happened to be giving a talk at Upaya Zen Center in Santa Fe the day the election results were announced in 2016, and Roshi Joan Halifax came into the Zendo at the time I was scheduled to give the talk, and she very, without imposing herself into the situation, said, "What do you think? Could we share your talk tonight? Could I share your talk tonight?" Because we thought we were going to wake up to having the first woman president, and instead things have gone another way, and this evening's talk is the first chance I've had to address the assembly. So we ended up sharing that talk. And ever since then, these issues or similar ones have been arising one way or another, just the social disruption. And given that I don't necessarily know how to respond to this, being in a position of speaking to others who are upset and disturbed, and sometimes in a panic, sometimes kind of freaking out, over events and over what's going on. Sometimes it feels like the main thing we can offer is being peaceful and centered in the midst of it. To offer that as a possibility to people, because even people who've practiced for many years aren't always able to find and keep that center in times of turmoil. So Daido goes on, "I have no idea what we'll be called on to do, but whatever it is, I want to be able to respond along with people who are also calm, efficient, and ready to serve. Let zazen be our reference point." Certain things are so in common with that time, in that there's a lot of blame going around. There's a lot of targeting of certain ethnic groups, and again, it's from a different angle, but it's interesting that some of the same groups are being targeted. For instance, people from the Middle East, Muslims. We seem to have this human issue of when things are in turmoil, looking around and wanting to point a finger at who's to blame. And there's a lot of fingers, in this case, pointing in a lot of different directions, but there's also a lot of pointing them at certain groups of people. And one way to boil down the point of our practice course, it begins with the first noble truth of suffering, right? We're trying to deal with suffering. The second truth, which is we often speak of it as grasping or aversion. We want to grasp after something that we think we need, but it's impermanent, it's not going to satisfy. Or we want to push away the moment as it is, and or push away our life as it is, which is a hidden version of the same thing, because behind that is maybe there's something better, right? But one way to look kind of beneath that is, this is all about separation. If we didn't feel separate, what would we be grasping after? You know, if we didn't feel to experience aversion or try and push something away, we have to feel separate from it, right? So this question of separation, which was playing out at the time I'm sharing, but also is playing out just hugely now in our country. Well, it just, you think people would have caught on 2,500 years ago. The Buddha talked about this stuff, and and we still haven't got it. That separation is a big problem, and our attempts to find safety by creating more separation, pushing away certain groups of people, etc., they never amount to anything good, do they? So it's a little different what I'm about to read from our current situation, but there's a lot that's similar. Daido Loori says, if someone dislikes you intensely, you need to find out why. Now, of course, in this case, he's talking about the people who did the terrorist attack on the World Trade Center. But aren't we experiencing that now? Don't we have opposing groups in this country who dislike each other intensely? And aren't we oftentimes withdrawn into our own camps without really understanding, for instance, why people like me get called lunatic left-wing fanatics? Why do they think I'm a lunatic left-wing fanatic? You know, well, really, just I thought our country was supposed to be founded on equality and acceptance for all, and actually, I thought we're all descended from, almost all of us are descended from immigrants, and et cetera, et cetera. So why are those things seen, the idea of wanting to provide for all and for wealth to be somewhat evenly distributed, at least? Why is that something that is so, it's actually kind of hated? Like why do certain people hate the liberal element of what the Democratic Party, which is deeply imperfect, claims to espouse? Why do people hate those ideas so much? Why do they hate the change in America and the welcoming of everyone? I mean, there's a lot of actual hate. And then there's the temptation, I don't know about you all, but I have not succumbed to hate to these people on the other side, apparently, who seem to be causing such harm to our society and the earth. But I can certainly see that temptation, right? But the funny thing is how little communication there is between the sides. And, well, lack of communication is almost what creates the different sides, right? Anyway, as a lunatic left-wing fanatic, I will continue to share some more quotes from this. Since I'm excerpting this, a lot of this refers to what do we find in our practice that can help us. So how many ways can compassion be expressed at this point? In a sense, that's always the question for a practitioner of this path. he says in relation to 9/11, but also in relation to what's going on now in this country and all the unrest. He's saying this situation should touch us as not only as spiritual practitioners called to clarity and love, but as citizens who are receiving the benefits of being an American and are therefore culpable for all the acts of aggression and domination that have, in this case, made people from other countries hate us so much. But nonetheless, I think, even though it's not exactly the situation, we are Americans who've enjoyed a certain standard of living, oftentimes at the expense of minority groups, not always minority groups, but minority and social groups in this country that have not had the same benefits. In other words, the quality of life that we have come to think of as normal has always involved people being oppressed, not even in other countries, on our own soil. And we seem to be cycling back to that again, to this idea that, well, there's a recent quote I heard from a person who is in a position of extreme power, and this person was quoting somebody from the past. It wasn't his own quote that he made up, but he was picking it up for a reason. This is a time where we can become rich, more rich than ever before. Only the weak will fail. Now that's quite an attitude, isn't it? Only the weak will fail. Only the weak will fail. It's almost as though there's certain elements in our society that actually hate people for being poor. You know, that hate people for having weakness, or at least diminish them and see them as other. You know, at least diminish them and see them as others. So, but on the other hand, you know, one of my big concerns, and I know of the Roshis too, are leaders in this Sangha, is the ecological balance of the earth, which is in pretty poor shape. And that's based directly upon consumption, and it's based directly upon what we, especially in America, have come to think of as the norm. You know, I think sometimes of the this kind of car culture that we take for granted, but it's fairly recent. Like my grandparents did not grow up in this kind of car culture. To me, those shows like Happy Days or the movies like Rebel Without a Cause that kind of romanticize that 1950s American life where teenagers, not even out of high school, own their own cars. And, you know, it's something I always saw as benign. In fact, when I became a teenager and I became 16, the first thing I wanted was to own my own car as soon as I had and I did manage to do that. But what a thing to take for granted, that now that I think of it, you know, it didn't occur to me at all at the time, but, you know, this, I don't know how much, well, I had an Oldsmobile Cutlass, an old tank. In fact, it was, its nickname was the Brontosaurus, an old tank of a car. What did those old cars weigh? Like a ton? What is it, a ton of metal? You know, and then racing around burning all of these fossil fuels. How did that ever just seem normal to us? You know, it's so, you know, that 16-year-old kids can have their own, you know, Brontosaurus and drive it around and, you know, use up all these materials. And somehow there's so much that we've taken for granted, which is under threat now, but maybe it needs to be under threat. You know, maybe maybe it's inevitable that it would be under threat. Somewhere in here they say again and again too, and I want to get to Miyotai, who's Daido's Dharma successor, who, if anything, being running the New York Sangha, she said even she gave even better guidance, if anything. She was right on the ground there. Well, anyway, I'll just, rather than further digress, let me share some more. There were a lot of dialogues with students at the time, practitioners, as we've been doing, as I want to get to shortly as well. They're talking about how difficult it is to point to, well, in some of the ancient texts, the Pali Sutras, the original sutras of the Buddha, he says nobody can trace all the twists and turns of karma. It's even though there is cause and effect, and we can see that things lead to certain outcomes, to try and sort it all out is beyond any human mind. And so a student here says, you can't just point out one CEO and say, there it is, there's the crux of the problem. And isn't that part of what makes situations like this so difficult? In a way, we're all part of the problem, right? Actually, the biggest part of the problem is most people didn't vote. The majority of the country didn't vote in this election. So most people didn't even participate. So talk about complacency in America, right? Talk about expecting the status quo to just continue, you know? I'm going to flip ahead to some other stuff. They talk a lot about, in this time, about some people just had trouble taking on the events as real because they're pointing to how much we've been desensitized by the media to images of violence and destruction and such. And I remember one of my students here at University of New Mexico, Taos, he witnessed a man being shot. And this is in one of my meditation classes. People bring up all sorts of stuff, and I can't remember why he brought it up anymore. But and someone in the class asked, well, that must have been horrific. What was that like to just see it was a person he knew being shot right in front of his eyes, like right next to him? And he said he couldn't connect with the reality of it. He said he felt like he was watching a movie. And so here's something that addresses that. Somehow our collective psyche is sensitized, has become desensitized to something even as crazy and horrific as this. It becomes another TV image, another news entertainment event. Now, do you ever feel like watching the political circus lately? It has become like a reality TV event. It's hard to even believe it's happening. It's hard to even believe that our democratic structures are being dismantled before our eyes, and they are. That is what's happening, and everybody is in a similar kind of shock. And it is almost like it in a very big way. It is an ongoing. It's everybody's obsessed with watching this reality TV show that's been going on, right? And on the one hand, I think many of us are shocked. On the other hand, I think many of us are just numb. It's like more of this, you know, and it feels so much out of our hands. So Daido says, I hope these events really wake us up like a slap in the face, and that we get serious and that we look at the whole world and see the suffering. that we stop seeing everything through the filter of our own egos, where everything revolves around us. Wouldn't it be great if we could take it that way? I want to hear from all of you, just as happened in these dialogues, but I'll share a little bit more first. So this is Miyotai, who, as I said, was right on the ground, not far from the events actually as they happened, at the Brooklyn the center in Brooklyn where they were, and one of the things that is spoken of, I don't know if I'll find a specific quote about that, is to that in our sitting, in our practice, in our zazen, may arise the intuition of what there is to do, of how we're called, or how we may be called. We may not know how we're called yet because the situations are all still unfolding. We have no idea really what's going to come, which is always the way it is. It's just situations like this bring that into focus, don't they? In a different way. We don't know what's going to happen, and there's no true security. We can't really rely on, just because life in America, despite all the ups and downs, has gone along in a seemingly predictable way for most of my lifetime, doesn't mean it's bound to continue that way. Germany, at the time the Nazis came to power, was the most diverse, well-educated, and in some ways the most progressive society in Europe. And it just seemed unimaginable that I mean, they had their problems. They were between the wars and they had massive inflation. I'm not saying there wasn't other things going on, but it was definitely a society that seemed so integrated and functional, and as I say, educated, that the events that followed were unimaginable, and that's a good thing to remember for us, is because just because we can't imagine things doesn't mean they won't happen, right? Which is not to scare us. We have our zazen. We have this practice which can keep us centered and grounded and calm, even in the midst of crisis. And at this time they were predicting. I was actually trapped in Canada when this happened. I was teaching a writing workshop in Canada, and the airports were closed for some time. And after the writing workshop, I had to stay on. I think it was a week or something, because they weren't opening the airports. Everybody kept waiting for something else to happen. They kept thinking something else was that big was going to happen again, and it didn't exactly turn out that way, but other things turned out. Other karmas, other cause and events rose out of it, some of which is still playing out to this day, right? So let me read, I'll let Miyotai have the last say on this. She says, anger arises and it needs to be practiced. I don't know about you all, but I felt angry at what's happening in our country. I feel angry that so many efforts towards justice and inclusivity are being systematically dismantled. I'm a little amazed that racism has come so much to the fore, that it's being openly practiced by our government. It's happening right in front of us. It's incredible. women's rights being rolled back, all of this stuff. So yes, I've been angry, and we, those of us who feel angry, need to be able to work with that emotion. So she says we need to acknowledge it, not deny it, or try to be angelic and look enlightened. Our charge is to be real and to work with what's real by feeling it, and also by letting go of the ideas that come up around it. In one sense, anger has a wisdom. If we take ourselves out of the equation and drop the illusion of separation, then our anger is nothing but life wanting to take care of life. It's actually compassionate action in a particularly pure expression. But if we add even a hint of separation, then we're faced with someone else or something other that becomes our enemy. We need to stay attuned to what's calling us. And one of the best ways of doing that is through zazen. People will be called in a million different ways. People have said that the karma of what's happening, the confusion that created it, indicates a clear path to the mass destruction of life on Earth. That may be. Again, it's a different situation, and people, to me, that possibility of mass destruction is more in our face than it was at that time. You know, at that time, it's a massive, and yet, as it turns out, fairly isolated terrorist incident. Climate change wasn't even on the map yet. So as far as the destruction of life on Earth, well, all life on Earth isn't going to be destroyed by climate change. The human race could be in trouble. The Earth will do just fine. Nonetheless, she goes on to talk about that we can point to the possibility for disaster, but why not point to the strength of the human heart and to the clarity of love that might be available? I think most of you know Tanya, my wife, is English. She actually has dual citizenship now. So of course, like many people, we think of leaving the country. and it's interesting to me that came up to many people there, and she goes on to talk about it. She says, I haven't talked to anyone here who hasn't wondered, should I go to Canada, New Zealand? Where can I find a safe spot? If we give attention to that, we realize we're impermanent. We're all going to die. This body will die. We don't know when or how, but what we do know is we're responsible for what we create in the moment, and we have many choices. It's important that we forgive ourselves for wondering how to find a place that will survive all threats. But there is no such place to hide. That's the rawness we're encountering. I think that's the rawness we always encounter in times of chaos, especially social, societal chaos and turmoil. In a visceral way, let's see, this is the rawness we're encountering in a visceral way. If things move in the direction of the worst possibilities, all that's left is the choice between love and fear. Isn't that interesting? What's left is the choice between love and fear. There's a lot of stoking of fear these days, isn't there? That's where a lot of this divisions come from. I'll confess that over the first few days I had the passing thought, well, I could go teach in New Zealand. I've had the exact same thought. Our Dharma brother Shinzen's in New Zealand, and I met many New Zealand Sangha members when I was in residence at the monastery, because they have a strong New Zealand Sangha, and Daido would go down there once a year to teach, and a lot of the New Zealanders would come. So when I think of getting away, really getting away, I think, how far could you go? New Zealand! So I'll confess that over these days I've had the passing thought, well, I could go teach in New Zealand. But then I realized I'd have to get a boat large enough to take everybody I love with me. And by the time I was finished, I would have to build a world-sized boat so I could take everyone. So I might as well stay put. I guess I'll let Miotai there have the last word on that. We'd have to build a world-sized boat. Yeah. So anyway, I'd love to hear from the Sangha. Questions, comments, objections.